Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Carol. It's it's a privilege to be talking to you today. But I want to fact check one thing first. I think the Washington Post won another Pulitzer in 2022 for public service, and I think you were on that team.
Sorry, she's saying in the back they can't hear us.
Oh.
A little closer. We both have good voices.
There you go. I'll try again.
We'll get closer.
I was fact checking her introduction. I understand that you were part of the team that won the Pulitzer in 2022 for the Washington Post. So you have 3 Pulitzers, not 2? 4. Oh my God. All right. What was the 4th?
My bio is a little delayed, but I'm so glad you brought up the 2022 because we're very proud of that moment. My one-sentence interruption to Jane's beginning is that when Congress was fighting, McCarthy and Pelosi fighting over whether or not to people and populate an investigation of January 6th, my editor, Mateo Gold, who is now the deputy managing editor, said, okay, fine, they're not going to investigate January 6th, we will. And that's what we did. And our series was called The Attack, Before, During, and After. And if you have the stomach, it is the equivalent of 17 newspapers to read. But it takes you through all of the warnings that foreshadowed what would happen, all of the things Donald Trump did, and moves into what he actually did that day and the aftermath. And it is many of the elements of what is reported in the indictment by Jack Smith. There are notations to our story in it.
Yeah. You stole my line, but I think, in fact, journalism and the Washington Post in particular sort of laid down the tracks of what came later, both by the January 6th committee and later by the indictment of the recent indictment. And I think, we can't forget that journalism is kind of the baseline for a lot of what we know today about the Trump presidency, and Carol's a key part of that.
It's, I'm sorry I stole your line. So Jane and I, have had some quality time during this weekend, including dinner last night, which was lovely. I realized how much she and I have in common. And she asked me a lot of questions. She didn't give it all away, right, what she was going to do, but it reminded me, our conversation last night, of a colleague of mine. You guys all came to the tent to see Carol Leonnig and Jane Seagraves, but I have a colleague who few of you probably know, named Amy Gardner at the Washington Post. And on January 2nd of 2021, Donald Trump, despite many objections by his staff, insisted on a call with a man named, forgive me, Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, insisted on calling him. And one of Brad's aides recorded the call, thinking that's just what we do. We just make sure everybody remembers what was said. My colleague Amy Gardner got a copy of that tape, and we published it in the paper within days of it happening. So much of what Jack Smith relies on in terms of, and not entirely, I'm not saying it's all the Washington Post, but much of what he relies on is material. He's literally quoting from the tape recording that Amy Gardner obtained and published in our paper. And I'd give one more shout out, which is the Washington Post, not the only place. The New York Times did amazing reporting, Politico, ProPublica, and to be fair, the badass prosecutors, former prosecutors, who peopled and led the January 6th committee. Several U.S. attorneys, really stunning work.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about the indictment and what you think about Jack Smith's indictment, which interestingly mentions or doesn't bring any charges about the incitement piece of the insurrection, which I think you did a lot of reporting on. Are you troubled by the fact that he didn't bring charges around incitement?
Here's my two-part reaction to that. One, I'm a reporter, as Jane is, and we don't sort of throw down with what we think should happen. But I will do a little analysis of what I think is going on with Jack Smith's indictment. He is clearly laser focused on one person who, under the prosecutor's manual, needs to be charged now before he is in the year-long campaign, final stretch of the campaign. You might remember the prosecutor's manual says don't take any public action right in the middle of the heat of a political race. And you will see he hasn't charged the co-conspirators, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Jeffrey Clark, Kenneth Chesebro, and a person who we believe that we can't name right now. Those people haven't been charged. Who's he laser focused on? Donald Trump. He's moving to demand the Speedy Trial Act, which is trial within 70 days, give or take, of the arraignment. He's moving with speed. He's also, it seems to me, has crafted a very streamlined indictment that avoids constitutional landmines, avoiding free speech complaints. And then with regard to incitement could just be a great red flag. It's a harder case to prove. It'll take more time. It will also potentially derail the streamlined case he has, where to my mind, I'm not saying he has him dead to rights on the pieces he has laid out. The facts are incontrovertible. As you know, many of them played out in public or were reported in real time. And he obstructed a government proceeding. There's very little chance you can say he didn't engage in agreements with others to obstruct a government proceeding. So it feels like it's the cleanest, meanest, sharpest knife.
And one of the other things I've heard you say is your frustration that there's not been much of an investigation into how members of Congress, the Freedom Caucus, et cetera, were involved in the whole lead up to the insurrection on January 6th. There are no elected officials named as co-conspirators in this indictment. How does that sit with you?
Now you stole my line. No, that's a double barrel question that's perfect, and not everybody may have noticed. Jane's obviously a good reporter because not everybody would have noticed that I've zeroed in to a degree on why weren't members of Congress investigated more thoroughly. And I think it again goes to the heart. I am speculating like an educated consumer, to use the Sims line. I don't know what's in Jack Smith's heart, but going after members of Congress triggers all sorts of speech and debate clause protections for Congress. Everything they say and do, they believe is protected from criminal investigation and grand jury subpoena. So they could raise that argument till death do us part. And that is a time suck. I hope I'm making myself clear about that. So, and to me, as a reporter, if I had subpoena power, I'd be like, and I'm not picking these people because they're off the charts zany in their claims, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, she posted on her website and other social media sites a video on December 20th or 19th, correct me later if I'm wrong, in which she said, we've just left the West Wing and the meeting with the president, and we have a plan for January 6th and how to stop what's going to happen and keep him in power. And I'm thinking, let's interview her and find out what that plan was. I would want to interview her, Mo Biggs, every member of the Freedom Caucus who was there, Ali Alexander, who you know got the rally permit at the Ellipse. He was present at the White House. I would want to know, what did they say? What did they hear Trump say? But that's going to take too long for Jack Smith, and unfortunately, I don't have those superpowers yet.
Well, you did interview 140 people for this book by my record. And I know, I mean, you're an investigative reporter, you're not going to give up sources, but can you sort of describe who those 140 people were? Generally?
You know, your husband and I spoke briefly outside the tent, and you must have given him this question because he raised something similar. I can say almost everyone we spoke to, we agreed that we would let them speak on background for history. Many of them were afraid of Donald Trump. You know, they wanted to tell what really happened in the rooms. We wanted to take people in the room where it happened. That was more important to us than their identity, and we had to be very, very careful with a group of people who sometimes err on the side of airbrushing their own behaviors or airbrushing Donald Trump's behaviors. So we had to really carefully corroborate this work, and that was time-consuming. But we agreed to let them speak on background because of their fear of him and because of their fear of their peers. Almost all of these people were Republican aides to Donald Trump. They were cabinet members. They were lawmakers. They were deputy principal assistants without giving all the titles. They worked in the White House. They worked in senior positions in the executive branch. I can tell you that there is one person I can confirm we spoke to because he was questioned about it before Congress and was asked, did you speak to Carol Leonnig and Phil Rucker? And he said, I did. And that was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. We spent quality time learning from him his experiences during those final weeks of the administration and the I wouldn't say panic, but the grave fear that he felt about what might happen.
Can I interrupt you about that? Because he does come across sort of as the hero of a big piece of this book, I thought. Among other things, I think one of the most chilling parts for me was the fact that Donald Trump was pressing very hard for federal troops during the whole Black Lives Matter reaction to the George Floyd killing, and persistently wanted to send out probably the Army if he could have. And later in his interview with you, said that was one of his biggest mistakes, that he didn't actually clamp down on protesters in that period. And Milley seemed to be the guy who almost single-handedly kept him from, arming the government.
Mark Milley definitely was, as I think one of his aides said, was wise to the jig. He knew what Trump was up to. He suspected almost from basically October what Donald Trump was planning. He saw different machinations around him in which he felt that Trump was trying to install certain lackeys, really, who had no business being in specific jobs right before the election, which sort of tells you that Donald Trump knew that his pollsters were accurately telling him he was going to lose, because they were telling him that for 2 months leading up to November 3rd. And some of the things Milley saw, for example, he's at I want to say the name of the game right, and I'm going to forget, but I think it's basically an Army-Navy game somewhere, and he is there, obviously, for a ceremonial role, and he sees in the president's box the president and Kaj Patel and some other people meeting. Kaj Patel, he knows, has been quickly summoned back on a military jet to Washington, and he thinks that's suspicious, and he realizes by his own reporting that there's a move afoot inside the White House to install Kaj Patel as the CIA director. And he's kind of like, okay, that's super worrisome, because his belief is as soon as Trump gets the guys with the guns, which is how he tells it, how Milley tells it to his aides, we're in trouble. When he gets the CIA, the DOD, or the DOJ, it's over. If he gets 2 or 3 of those, it feels like he's lurching towards that control box. And And Millie basically gets in Kaj Patel's face and another person's face and says, "What is going on? I see what you're doing." He's definitely a force. Another force, though, Jane, you said stopping him from arming everybody against the protesters. Another force for that is Esper, who really fights that until Trump fires him.
Yeah. So,
sorry, the Department of Defense Secretary.
Yeah. God forbid we get another term of Donald Trump, but if we do, are there guardrails against that impulse?
You know, I don't want to. I want to not be flip. Yeah. But it's hard for me to imagine that I'll be able to safely report. Yeah. We'll see. You know, the time will tell. But there are a lot of things that I'm expecting will be drastically different, all of our assumptions. And so guardrails, while I think that's a really good question, there were so many people throwing their bodies in front of Donald Trump, and interestingly, Republicans. So many people trying to stop him. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a digression because I'm afraid to really answer your question. But, you know, there's a lot of talk in Twitter and social media about everybody hating Mark Meadows. My understanding is Mark Meadows definitely played both sides of the field in terms of trying to make the boss feel important and special and like he won, but also quietly behind the scenes doing a lot of things to get people to throw their body in front of crazier plans that Trump had. And, you know, he did give honest testimony in this grand jury and said exactly what Trump told him and what he did in response. And it actually buttresses the indictment. So I wanted to just say, to remind you that guardrails we had were people Donald Trump chose who tried to stop him. And it's hard to imagine he's going to choose anyone in the future who will ever get in his way again.
Let's talk sort of broadly about the journalism questions. I mean, you just described your reporting process where you talked to people who were largely Republicans for a book about Trump. You talked to him. And yet somehow people disbelieve, and we discussed this between us, there's a core of people that think your reporting is biased somehow, that think the news media is making this stuff up. You know, I feel it in Martha's Vineyard from time to time. People just don't trust us anymore. Maybe you could just talk about that. Is that a function of Donald Trump's assault on the media, or is it something that we can do something about?
You know, I'm so glad you asked it, Jane, and we did have a little bit of a chat about this the other night. But I'm really glad to engage on it because it's been on my mind for several years. You know, I've been called fake news so long, yeah. I'm kind of numb to it, but I feel like there are some role models out there in journalism that on a small scale, and we should replicate them on a broader scale. I've often said we need to show our work, you know, kind of like I say to my kids about math. By the way, I don't understand any of their math problems. But I often will say, show your work. You know, let's figure out as journalists how we can say, we talked to 17 people that are Republican aides to Donald Trump who said this is how the conversation went down. That has not, as much as we do that, it hasn't made a very significant impact. I think it's healthy and smart for us to show our work, but I'm not sure that it's turning the corner for us with large pockets of America. The thing I think we could replicate, and there are a few standout examples of this, a couple people at the New Yorker, unusually enough in that hotbed of liberalism, and a couple other places in television news where people are embedding themselves in red state communities and finding out what those folks are interested. I'll put it this way. What do you want to know the answer to? What are you bothered by? What do you think we can report on to get to the bottom of the question that's vexing you? Engage that community in the reporting so they can watch you doing it, and then show them your work, show them your product. I feel like there have been a couple examples of this. A friend of mine, Paige Williams at the New Yorker, I said hotbed of liberalism. She's an objective, straight down the line finder of fact. But she did this in the Kyle Rittenhouse reporting, and really became so respected by both sides of that debate because of the rigor of her work, and also because she engaged with a community that usually just says, liberal media, CNN, fake news, and they tweeted her reporting about Kyle Rittenhouse's and the investigation, the evidence about him and the investigation into him and the shootings in Wisconsin. And they tweeted her work and were proudly spreading it. Another great example is Caroline Kirchner at the Washington Post, who's done some stunning and Pulitzer Prize winning work about abortion rights. Her work has been held up by abortion rights and abortion foes, abortion right activists and abortion foes, as telling the true story of how women are making these decisions in states where the rights are curtailed. Really like just a stunning development. I think all of us need to try to work towards that. That's a long answer, I'm sorry.
No, that's good. I want to ask, a lot of your reporting career has really been about the security services. You did a book on the Secret Service. You did a lot of work about how the security services failed, the FBI, to predict the insurrection on January 6th. I'm curious, and there must be a multitude of reasons for that, but we've seen the failure of 9/11. We've seen the failure of January 6th. Do you have any confidence that things have changed so that we're going to be in a better position the next time domestic terrorism, for example, comes up?
I think I'd like to quote a Secret Service agent that I think the world of and had been a source of mine for a long time. And this is a small example, but I think it reveals the broader pattern in national security services that Jane's question is jumping into. When a fence jumper got over the fence, not very high fence, by the way, around the White House, and it happened to be on my wedding anniversary, too bad, and he got over the fence and got inside the house and pushed past the door that was guarded by several men and women with guns and attack dogs and an emergency response team. When he got inside, ran the State Hall, past the doors and the stairway to the Obama's personal residence and into the green room and back down the State Hall, all that happened. This agent said to me, it's a failure of imagination, a failure to imagine what was possible. And I was like, oh, that sounds so familiar. It sounds like the 9/11 report. And he and I laughed. But it is just so true. So much of what our security agencies are doing is responding to something that has just happened. I mean, we are all still, people in the audience may be angry at me, but we are all still taking our shoes off at the airport because of one event that we did not envision. And, that attempted bomber was one moment in time. We are still keeping all of our moisturizers in 2.7 ounce categories because of this one thing that was not envisioned. It is almost like, it's almost nutty to steer ourselves to the thing that happened behind us rather than the thing that can happen in front of us. I am a little bit embarrassed to say this, but Jane, you are the kind of questioner that sort of spurs this. As reporters, we knew Donald Trump wanted to hold on to power. Sorry to bring it back to him. But we did not envision a violent insurrection at the Capitol. When he said, "Be there January 6th, will be wild," we were like, okay, great. That's going to be a lot of fun. That's not too fun, but that's going to be a crappy assignment for somebody. But nobody really envisioned that.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't blame the reporting community for that. I mean, they were getting, people should be monitoring, the dark web, and there was information coming in. And some of your reporting suggests that there's, the FBI, for example, didn't want to, and this happened, I think, with the records search at Mar-a-Lago. They didn't want to look aggressive at a time when that might embarrass the agency. They're sort of gun shy of publicity. It seems to me that we've gotten into sort of a world where doing the right thing is kind of magnified by the media at large, by social media, by impressions of people.
I think you've knitted together two important things that I don't typically knit together, but I think that it's smart to do it. The FBI failed to alert the public to what they knew was brewing. And or I should say, what they were warned repeatedly was brewing. People literally wrote on open source websites, not dark ones, make sure to bring this kind of gun. We can hide this kind. Here's how you get it into DC, and be prepared to draw down on the cops. I mean, what more incendiary thing and plan do you need to do a preliminary investigation or a knock and talk on somebody who's plotting and proposing how to bring guns, even if they're bragging? We typically, as a country, have our law enforcement agencies check that out. Let me tell you how many times Secret Service agents do a knock and talk when somebody's drunk in a bar and says, "I wish blankety blank president was dead." They do, and they should have done it in this instance. They failed. Was that because they are conservative leaning? Was that because they were presuming that white conservative oath keepers, who are often peopled by former law enforcement, would never come for law enforcement? Were they doing it because they had been so beaten down over the years by a Donald Trump who had ripped apart the careers of FBI employees who investigated Russian contacts with his campaign? We don't know the answer. But it seems like all three could have figured into it.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground, but we'd like to hear from you now. So I think there are microphones up. If anyone has a question for Carol, please come forward. Yeah, go to a mic.
First of all, I just want to thank you so much, Carol, for all your work. It's just been fantastic. And also just to praise all the female journalists who have been involved in bringing this story to us, who have now become the equal of the male journalists, just to point that out. And before this event, I gave Carol my suggestion for her next book on the 24 campaign, which is I Alone Can Nix It. Meaning the American voter, meaning us, and we all know that. And hopefully this has engaged us to the point where that will happen. And I just want to say one last thing, which is getting the indictment from Jack Smith. And by the way, the bumper sticker for him is Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. I'm a punster. Getting the indictment is the top of the mountain for me. So having all the people that you just so graciously pointed to as having contributed to it from all the different areas of expertise, culminate in this indictment. And so whatever happens from here on forth, to me, is it's like a whole other story, so to speak. Do you know what I mean? And it's in the hands of the jury, if it ever gets to a jury, and all like that. And one last thing is there's going to be a lot written after the fact when you spoke about the people you wish you could have covered and, the Republicans and stuff. Isn't all of that stuff going to be able to come out later, after the fact?
I mean, I think I'm going to be writing about this guy for a while. That's my answer. A lot will come out. I promise to deliver it to you in a timely way. Thank you for your comment.
Let's get a question over here.
Hi, I have a really quick question. How do we deal with Fox No News?
Another,
I watch Fox a lot to find out what they're saying, and all of these efforts to embed liberal reporters in red states, it seems like tiddlywinks compared to the power of Fox. And I just want to bring it up, but also ask you sort of where this fits into this whole horrible conversation. I mean, horrible,
you
Thank
couldn't be more right in your tiddlywinks comparison, and I don't take any offense. You're absolutely right. I mean, I've written a lot about national security, as Jane mentioned, and I've spent a lot of time in the family and living rooms of Secret Service agents who definitely lean red, and Fox is on all day long. The TV's on the whole time. It's almost like, and it's such BS. I mean, there's so little actual reporting. It sort of stuns me if you did a comparison. This is tiddlywinks. It won't solve your issue, but I think more and more reporters should be lobbying to get time on Fox News as contributors. I'm a contributor at MSNBC News, which I think people can rightly argue is part of the echo chamber. And I'm on it because I'm trying to promote Washington Post independent exclusive reporting to a larger audience. But I want to be on Fox News talking just the way, and I don't mean opinionating, I just mean sharing my reporting, because if somebody hears me say it rationally and calmly in this Jane Carroll register of voice, they're going to go, oh, maybe there's something to that, because what they're hearing is crazy town. So I am working on that, and I'll let you know how I do.
You said how important it is to show your work. Do you have any opinion about whether this court case should be televised, and if so, will it happen?
So I do try to avoid having any political opinions, but on the opinion of transparency and a courthouse, you could not have a more important case that for the country. And I don't mean for Martha's Vineyard or the Democratic Party, the country. Just like Fox News and MSNBC are two silos, break it down and just have the courthouse open. I would hope that could happen. And I know Judge Chutkan's reputation. I know her because I used to cover that courthouse. When I covered it, George Bush's White House was under investigation for leaking a CIA operative's name. Karl Rove was under investigation, Scooter Libby, a host of other people, and Scooter Libby was being charged. At the time, Chief Judge Hogan, a real lion in the judiciary, a Republican appointee, Reagan appointee, sort of went way beyond in terms of making sure the public could have instantaneous access to that entire court proceeding. Now, it wasn't televised because we weren't that advanced, but it was on the internet in seconds. He arranged for something that we'd never had before, reporters to go in between the courtroom and an overflow room to type in real time and put things up on the internet. He had it recorded so people could listen to it later. I'm so proud to have watched that and experienced it, and I feel like Judge Chutkan may reprise that in another modern form, and I would welcome that in Judge Hogan's honor.
We're almost out of time, but we have one question
My
here.
answers are so long, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you for all your work. I watch you on MSNBC, but my concern is that CNN and MSNBC have only focused on Trump over all these years. I mean, he takes out the oxygen, all the oxygen out of the room, and Biden is not getting credit for his accomplishments, and you barely hear his name anywhere. And I'm wondering how that can be remedied, because Trump makes sure he's out front every second of every day. And if people knew more what Biden is doing, perhaps his ratings would be higher and people would appreciate the work he's done for the American people. Thank you.
I think that's more of a comment, and I can't do anything about it, but I appreciate what you're saying.
I'm afraid we've got to wrap up. Thank you, Carol. You've been a great guest and a great journalist.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. That was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you again to our author and moderator. Thanks again to all of you. Once again, you can